This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook and Super Inframan. Thank you so very much. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I am welcoming back Mr. Ian Jaydid. Am I saying your last name right?
Or Jaydid, yeah.
Jaydid, okay. And you were on probably about 9 months ago or so, beginning of the year?
I think I looked into it when I contacted you again, and I think it was around, I think it was about 9-10 months ago, something, okay. Yeah.
So you've written another book since then. Your first book was called what?
Tripping the Field. And Tripping the Field was fiction. Yep. And now I just finished Migration, and Migration is nonfiction. And they are both sprouted from the exact same general philosophy, which I'm sure we're going to get into here. But Tripping the Field is the one where I said, all right, let's play with these ideas that I've got this general philosophy of how the paranormal works from my perspective, and let's just take that to its furthest extremes. And I just went wild in Tripping the Field. Tripping the Field is it's my love child. I love that book. It's total fiction. It's nonsense. It's a little bit of sci-fi. It's a little bit of shamanism. There's crazy religious cults and shape-shifting, but it's all based on a theory that is really fairly grounded. So it's one of those things that it's like, all right, so what are we really saying here? How crazy can we take these ideas, which we'll be talking about? Migration, the one I just kicked out, which is, that's recent. I just kicked that out a few weeks ago. That one is much more where I just lay it out and I'm talking much more directly to my audience. It's just more of an analysis of the ideas that we'll be talking about. So it's like this. They're like two totally different books, born of the same mind. Of course, How could it not be?
And sometimes fiction's easier to express this stuff in than laying out facts. Because you can play with it more in fiction. I
don't at this point. I spent years on Migration. In fact, actually, I started Migration before Tripping the Field, but then I moved back and forth between both of them. But at this point, what it took to do a good nonfiction and to really have my information straight and to have all of my to do the research and to credit the right people, I don't think I'll ever write anything like that again. I feel like I did it. I did a nonfiction and I'm done. I don't want to do that again. I'm like, no, that's good. I'm good with that. I'm taking a hiatus now from writing. I'm doing these videos for YouTube and whatnot that's based on Migration. But when I pick up writing again, which may be months from now, I don't know, I'll do a sequel to Tripping the Field. For the future going forward, that's where my heart is at. I'm going to keep on writing for Tripping the Field. So it's characters that could continue. So I like that was cool. The intention of hey, I could write 20 volumes of this if I wanted to.
Well, we were talking about Graham Hancock before we started recording, and I mean he wrote mostly nonfiction. And at a point, he took a break to do fiction, and people were like, why are you writing fiction? He's like, because it's easier. I don't have to sit here and do all this research. I can just write and put the idea out, and no one's going to, analyze it and tear it apart, and I don't need a million footnotes, and I don't need this. And I'm like, I understand that,
Totally. Yeah. It's, I paint. That's my first love. I'm an artist, really, first and foremost. And so that's what I've been doing forever. And for me, writing fiction and painting it's kind of the same brain, kind of that right brain sort of thing where you're kind of coming from that part of yourself that you can just sort of go into that Zen sort of state, whatever you want to call it. That's sort of just, I can turn my brain off and go, boop, I can just write crazy stuff all day and let my mind wander. And so Tripping the Field is one of those things that was not really planned. It was like I would just kind of go into these states of meditation and whatnot, and I would just blank out, and then it was like downloaded to me in pieces where I was like, it was just like, oh yeah, that's how that next scene is absolutely supposed to go.
Yep.
And what's weird about that is that I can now read that book now, and I've had to scour over that book over and over. I've probably had to read it now 20 times. I can still pick it up today and go, oh man, what's going to happen next? Because I almost feel like I didn't really write it. When I read it, I'm like, where did this come from? I don't even know where this came from.
Yeah.
But it's weird. Art, creating anything is weird though. Even my painting, sometimes I'll finish a painting. I'm like, I don't know how I did that. People ask, what's your secret? How did you learn this? Like, I have no idea. I don't know where it comes from. My brain goes out and my hand just does what it's going to do. And I type what I'm going to type. But nonfiction, it's not like that. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to draw diagrams. I have to come up with a total blow-by-blow plan for all of these arguments. But it's a great book. I mean, I'm really happy with it. And I think you'll enjoy reading it much more than I enjoyed editing it. I think I would say the editing is, oh my God, that's that part of my brain. I don't like math either, though. I'm one of those guys. I'm like, tell me the results of your mathematical equations. Like, I read quantum physics. I love that kind of stuff, but I'm like, I'll always just read their end result. Like, don't show me the equations. Those aren't going to mean anything to me.
Right. The theory's interesting, but I don't need the math.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'll trust you guys on that math. You guys, I'll just go ahead and say, all right, I'm going to just assume that you've checked your math on that.
and I've had that happen where I've gone to write something and it seemed like it just wrote itself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, how did I do this? And I wish I could do it all the time because that was really easy. It just flowed right out.
It should. And I think that, it's funny. That's Tripping the Field was the first fiction full book I ever wrote. And I was writing a lot before that with smaller, shorter stories. And I wrote for companies that was more like smaller research on medicinal plants and whatnot. But it was easy. In many ways it did. It just flowed out. And I can't really relate to a lot of other authors who sound traditional to me, who are like, oh, I've got the writer's block and I can't come up with inspiration for this. And to me, I'm like, I don't know what that's even like. For me, I'm always more like, I'm bursting at the seams with, I've got 20 different directions that I could go in, with this next thing. And I'm excited about all of them. And it's just a matter of, going down one of these paths. So far, there has not been. I'm saying this, and now watch tomorrow. I'll be crippled with just terrible, artist block, and I'll be crying to you. I'll be like, dude, what did you do to me?
Well, I think too, because it's not. I think when people write because it's a job, like anything else, it kind of sucks the inspiration out a little bit.
My grandfather on my mom's side, he was a portrait artist and he was amazing. He was just an incredible artist. But that's what he did for a living. And I felt that, of course there were other things going on with him personally, but I felt that he despised his job for the most part. There was no love in it. It was as much as just going to a job and doing, it's like, this is what pays me, it's like that sort of thing. And I never wanted my art to be like that. I never wanted, I always felt like I always wanted to go do something else. And so I've always kept a job, like a normal day job. And I'm just like, then my art is just my time. It's just my whatever, I don't have to go, this has to be done just like this, or this client isn't happy. That, that sort of thing. That's tough.
So yeah. How did you start sort of your paranormal, metaphysical sort of journey into all this stuff?
Yeah, that's what we're here to talk about. That's right. Let's get into it, right? So I'll give you a bit of background because I think it might help. Maybe it won't. So I grew up in a household that I never had religion shoved down my throat on any level. My parents were, in their own ways, always kind of seekers, people who are always kind of questioning what was the truth and whatnot. And, we went to like a Unitarian church every once in a while when I was growing up, but there was, it was a Unitarian. It was like a unity church. You know what I mean? Like it was real. Yeah. It's about as liberal as they could get. They're they would burn question marks in your front yard when they were pissed off at you. It was a real, like, we don't care, whatever you want to think, man, it's cool. And so anyway, I was always kind of taught to, hey, if I ask questions to my parents about the big questions, what else is out there? What is there God? Are any of the religions right? Yada yada. I mean, they were just real kind of quiet about it and just say, follow. You got to find your own answers. You got to find your own answers. And so I'm saying that I didn't go into any of this with any preconceptions. I never knew if I believed in anything. Even like as a little kid, you read about like Bigfoot and UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster, anything. I was fascinated by that kind of stuff, but even as a child, there was never a part of me that was like one way or the other, mm-hmm. I don't know if I believe any of this, but it fascinated me. I liked thinking about this kind of stuff, if nothing else, but I never really had an opinion about it. So at around the age of 19, I had just graduated high school. I had been graduated for maybe about 6-8 months. And my first experience, which I was later told when I thought I had to do some research later, I was told it was a lucid dream and perhaps an astral projection. I did not know what had happened to me, but what happened for the very first time was in the morning when I was about to wake up, I went into a visionary dream state, but I knew that I was asleep. I knew that my body was asleep. And there's a difference between dreaming that you think that you're like, oh, it's all just a dream. A lot of people have those kind of experiences where like, oh, I had a dream where I was like, I kind of knew it was a dream, but I was still running away from that monster because I was, being chased by some giant horde of zombies or whatever, you know.
Right.
To me, that's not what I'm talking about. A real lucid dream, I've come to find, is when you truly have dropped the dream narrative, is the best way that I like to describe it. You have dropped all pretense of story. There is no connection that you have to any storyline that the dream is spinning for you. You are completely as conscious as you are right now, in the day as you go. I know exactly what's going on. I know that none of this is real. I know that, that none of this is happening. And I know I'm asleep, and I know you could even, I would know what day it was, whatever. So I went into this visionary state, and what I was witnessing was a part of Michigan that my family owned a cabin at when I was growing up. But in this specific part of Michigan, it was perhaps like 200 years in the past. And I was seeing what this plot of land looked like where, the future family would have a cabin. And I was kind of just observing what the land looked like, what the territory looked like. And I also had information as I'm standing there, just kind of gazing around going, oh, this is what Michigan looked like. But I knew that I was dreaming, so I didn't really know what I was seeing. And what was even stranger was that even though I knew the reality of the context that I was in, everything was so realistic. I mean, it was like more real than my daily experiences. Like I could smell the air and feel the sun on my face, and I could, feel the wind and hear all the noises of the forest. And it was, I was standing just in this giant, just raw forest. And I was kind of standing in a clearing, a slightly sandy clearing. And as I kind of looked around at the scene, I realized that I was sensing other information about the scene I was in, and I knew where there was a tribe of natives, and I knew like they were off to the east. I could kind of picture their settlement to some level. I kind of knew like, oh, this is what their settlement looks like, and I kind of knew that I was kind of watching. It's if I was watching this scene through a child's eyes, like a child who I had felt had kind of wandered away from the tribe, for some reason, just kind of wandered away and was kind of off exploring further by the lakes. There's a series of lakes in this particular part of Michigan. And so the more that I tapped into what was going on in the scene, I just came up with this information was kind of just being downloaded to me. And I'm like, I'm not I don't feel like I'm making this up. I'm just kind of witnessing it. I'm just observing whatever the heck I'm observing. It just seems very, very real. And then I went to a specific spot on the ground, and there was this area that I knew that kind of the sort of the medicine men of the tribe, that's where they went and prayed or meditated, this one particular spot. And I knew that I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't like, this was not a place for children somehow. And I was like, ooh, I'm going to go to the place where I'm not supposed to be. I'm going to go sit in that spot, you know, that the holy man goes, you know, he goes and sits at. And so I did this. I went and sat on this spot on the ground. And as I did that, this insane amount of energy rushed up from the ground, like from under the earth, and it just shot me into oblivion. And it was like what they call, you know, in DMT trips, they might call that breaking through, where you are just shot into space is what it feels like, and all boundaries are dissolved. You are, you know, it's like an instantaneous enlightenment, one with the cosmos sort of thing. And there was music playing in the background, and I was like, I've heard this music, and I knew that I had heard this music millions of times through millions of incarnations. Somehow this music has always been with me every time I go through some giant transition like this, and all sense of identity and ego vanished. And the next moment I was awake in my bed, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs, and it took me a few moments to realize, oh, that sound is coming from me. That, like, what is that sound? Like, I'm like, somebody is hollering, where am I? And instinctually, luckily my parents were at work. I was alone at the house, so, you know, no one was like, what the heck is wrong with you? You know, what's going on? Instinctually, I got up and ran into the bathroom, and I looked in the bathroom mirror is the first thing I did. And I, you know, at the time, I didn't know why that was my first instinct, you know, kind of like run in, like I have to see what my reflection looks like. And later, as the more I thought about it, it's like, well, actually, that was the most terrifying part. I mean, it was the most euphoric thing I'd ever experienced. And let me just say, I've had this question a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and lay that out now. At this point in my life, I had never done a hallucinogen at all. I had no experience with psychoactives. In fact, at that point in my life, I think I'd only been, you know, maybe high on marijuana a few times. And this was like outside of Chicago, and the access to anything out there was pretty bad. It was the pot that we did get was just terrible. It was this horrible stuff. It would kind of make you paranoid and dizzy and give you a little bit of a headache. And you're like, ooh, that's good stuff. and so I had no experience with anything like that. Now later I found, in retrospect, now, you know, down the road, as I started to try to figure out, okay, what was that? That was not a dream. You know, what the heck was going on? But I should say that in retrospect, I was talking about the reflection in my mirror. Let me explain that real quick. I felt that really what was frightening about it was the idea that I had lost my identity completely. Somehow my narrative of everything about my life, you know, had just been ripped away for a moment. And it just seemed like there was nothing but just boundless space. And so I had to look in the mirror, because instinctually I'm like, am I still, you know, am I me? Who am I? You know, like what am I at this point? Am I still, you know, this Ian kid? You know? Right. So that was my instinct. So that was my very first experience, and it shook me up. It affected me. It frightened me a bit, but it also, mostly what it was is that it made me as curious could be. I'm like, okay, so what happened? And because I had no background in this, I was open to anything. I'm like, hey, maybe I had some brain anomaly. Maybe I should get an MRI. You know, I don't know. Maybe I had a seizure or something. I mean, people who have seizures sometimes speak of having very, you know, extremely intense, almost religious visions in some cases.
Right.
So I didn't know, but so I eventually I was checked out by a doctor. I felt comfortable after a while to mention what happened to my folks, and they didn't really know what to make of it. So what happened is I don't think I ever could have forgot that. I can still remember that experience. And that at this point, I'm 48. I was 19. That was quite a while ago.
Right.
I still can remember all of it. Just when I was telling you this story, I can remember all of it just like it just happened. And apparently that's another really interesting aspect of people who have near-death experiences or intense lucid dreams like this. That is a common trait that you will often remember these specifics forever. You know, once you call it up in your memory, it's like this just it feels like it just happened. It still gives me tingles right now. Just talking about it, it gives me goosebumps. So as the days went on, these started kicking in for me every night. And this went on for about 12 years. And in some cases, I would go into these visionary states that would last for hours on end. And apparently that's pretty rare. Most lucid dreams don't last that long. But I would have states where I would go into these waking worlds and for hours and hours on end. I would get up. If I had to use the bathroom or get a drink of water, I'd go back to sleep and it would just kick in again. And they finally tapered off maybe when I was around in my 30s, I'd say early 30s. They started slowly tapering off a little bit. And it was good. And I'm glad because I guess the only way I can describe it to those who would understand is that it's like if you were suddenly taking super strong hallucinogens every day for years and your boundaries and everything were just being dissolved again and again and again. It's like that. And so I felt that as they tapered off, I kind of had this intuition like, okay, now I've got to kind of learn how to get back there. Like, because these were spontaneous. I was not trying to kick these in. And we can talk about how to kick in some of these visionary states and what is at the heart of them. And there's all kinds of techniques that a lot of lucid dreamers and astral projectors, whatever they call them. I don't like that phrase, but that's what they use. The astral projectors, how about that? I don't know. Anyway, but there's all kinds of techniques that people have. And I don't really have a whole lot to say about that just because this happened to me rather spontaneously. And it took me years and years to start really formulating what was really happening, what's really going on here. If all things being equal, and I started reading, I picked up spiritual books about this. I finally learned, okay, this has been around in Buddhism and shamanism for thousands of years. This is, people have spoken about this. People have been writing about this. So I had some places to start. Again, it all seemed like Bigfoot to me, though, still just like, I don't know, like, what do these guys all have a narrative about? Well, this is it, you're having these spiritual experiences and your soul and your chakras are projecting out of your body, and everyone had their own story, if you yes. follow me. And so over the years now, I've probably read, I don't know how many different philosophies on this. I just started with a few different directions and I started chasing down like, well, what seems to make sense? What seems to make sense? So at this point, I've been studying this stuff for like 35 years. So I guess I would say I feel I have something to say on the matter, as sure. much as the next guy. And now I feel that I've come to a lot of I feel like I've come to the core mechanics behind all of this. And it's pretty free from any kind of spiritual or religious lingo. I try not to use any of their terminology that you would find in any kind of religion or tradition or anything, because I just feel like that hinders it. I feel like what I'm here to do, if there is such a thing as a purpose, I'm trying to describe why I feel that I've been able to do this. And again, if I had not made this clear, I know we've talked before. When I say that I was going into just lucid states, eventually what I started to have to learn on my own was that this was true, what they call out-of-body experiences. I started to be able to find friends and family while my body was asleep. I started going to these states where I was projected sometimes hundreds of miles away. I could see what my mother was doing in the morning, making breakfast in the morning. I could see these scenes perfectly clearly. I could see what, my girlfriend was doing. And it wasn't like spying. It was just like, I was just kind of connected to her and I'd go see where my girlfriend was at. And when I would approach this phenomena, I was, my dad was a mechanical engineer, a very, part A fits into part B, kind of mechanically inclined, very logical sort of a fellow. Both of us are. I mean, I know that I'm on the high end of the spectrum of functioning autism, and probably if my dad would have been tested when he was younger, that wasn't really a thing. My guess is that they would have suggested that he was on the spectrum too. So, I've got that Spock sort of mentality, I guess, in one way, where I'm just like, okay, well, so I've had this, I'd come back, I'd wake up in the morning like, okay, so I just saw what my mother was doing. I saw what time it was. I saw the clock on the wall. I saw her drop that pan when she tried to pull that pan out from under the stove. So I started making calls to people, later on, being very methodical about this. And I'm like, okay, you tell me, I need you to tell me exactly, I'd start with my mom or whoever, my dad or whoever I happened to visit that particular time. I was like, I need you to lay out the scene for me. Like, what were you doing at about whatever, like at the time where it was at 7:30 in the morning? I need to know blow by blow, like what were you wearing, everything.
Right.
And so as these stories started coming back to me, to my horror is what I would say, they were exactly, I mean, like, detail by detail of like, I could see what people were watching on television. I could see what they were wearing, everything, just like as I was standing there. Although it's not quite like standing there. There is a weird fishbowl effect is the best way I can describe it. Things are kind of slightly distorted when I would go into those states. And we can talk about that too. There's a distortion thing where it's not exactly like you're standing there. There's a very strange, I don't know, like you're underwater or something is how it feels for me, at least. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about these experiences. That's what it extended into. Now, at that time, the internet wasn't really a thing. So I couldn't really just go type this stuff in and go, well, what is the connection between these lucid states where I know I'm dreaming, and how does that follow into leaving or appearing to leave my body, whatever that meant? That I was able to come back with this kind of information that I should not have had again and again and again. So later, I eventually started finding some books where people like, oh, it turns out that lots of other people had found that there are natural connections between these things. But again, I'm such a skeptic. I don't believe anybody. I question everything.
Yeah,
heck, I've seen a couple UFOs now, and I'm still like, I don't know what the heck that was. I don't even know if I believe I saw it. It's just too crazy, that sort of thing. And so I'm forever the skeptic. And so every time I read anybody, I'm just like, man, I don't know what to believe. But hey, if some things ring true and other things don't. So there's my long-winded introduction.
Well, I wonder if what was happening had something to do with sort of an endogenous DMT release.
Exactly, and that's what I found out later. Yes, that once I started studying that, and I actually started experimenting with DMT. I'm like, I know what this is. I know what this sensation is, and sometimes I would wake up out of these states and I would be hallucinating so hard where I could not even hardly make it to the bathroom. I mean, I was like, oh my God, like I am tripping. Why am I tripping? And then it would wear off after just, a minute or so.
Right.
Yeah. Then I started later again. For me, this is how my life has been. I've had the experience first, and then later it was like, I'd read about it and go, oh, well, there it is. Someone else has had the same thing where you can just like you say, like, I know what DMT feels like, and I know what those effects are like very clearly. At this point now, I've experimented with every hallucinogenic alkaloid on the planet, as far as I've been able to find. So I've gone down that road as well, just looking for my answers. And so yeah, definitely endogenous DMT release. That is that as well. Yep.
So you mentioned that you're high functioning autistic. Do you think that has any play on this? Indeed.
I think, in fact, I wrote an article on this, maybe if anybody's interested in this, and I've tried to do a video. It was one of my earlier videos when I was just kind of doing a point and shoot thing. I've been trying to up my game with my editing skills and whatnot as I'm trying to describe these things in this video series that, like I'm talking about. I think that my autism plays directly into it, and it took me, again, years to understand what that was. And at first I had to understand what it was, how autism is such a ridiculous spectrum. It's such a wide spectrum that can mean so many different things.
Absolutely.
And to the point where so many people, they confuse it with like, Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man, like, oh, you're like really good at math. I'm like, no, actually I'm really terrible at math. It's got nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is that it's the best way I can describe it. I have a very loose relationship with my internal dialogue. That's the core of it. What my internal thinking, my thinking to myself, I don't have the same sort of relationship as most people do. I sort of stand back from my own internal voice and my sense of self and identity. This is before way before these experiences. I've always kind of felt like this, that I had to really integrate a normal internal thought pattern in a way that other people, I guess that they generally don't. Like I had a real hard time speaking to someone, and then I would have to kind of like replay it in my head and go, okay, how does this sound? How does my voice sound and whatnot? And so I got very good at trying to mimic other people, to like get, to work on inflection and intonation so that it sounded normal, so to speak, because I didn't have a normal connection with my own internal dialogue. So what that means, though, the way that plays out is that, we are storytelling animals.
Yes.
Right? We are storytelling animals. We have a story about everything. When we come into this world, from the time that we are taught language, or even before that, in nonverbal ways, we are taught what humans are about, and then later we're taught our story. That's what we were talking about as well with Graham Hancock and all those other guys who, in many ways, what those guys are doing is kind of retelling, like, what if this is a different story, a different narrative about who we humans are, that, and that scares the crap out of people, as I was, you and I were mentioning. That it's interesting that people have come across, and even, of course, Graham himself has come across so many people there are people who generally they're very afraid of the narrative of humans. And we're just going to start, that's the macrocosm, humans, because our narratives also go down to, of course, well, who is my community, and who is my family, and who am I, and what is my role in all of this? So all I can say is that aspect, that storytelling narrative part of myself, I've always sort of stood back at that, and I see it as, I see it as a mask. And I think that most people do not. They are very much sold into into their own narratives. They believe everything. They believe everything that they think. I think that's one way to describe it. People who believe everything that they think, and I never have. I never have, for whatever reason. Every time I've thought something, there's always a part of me going, yeah, are you sure? Is that the way it is? And so I've always been I feel like I've always been kind of an outsider to my own ego. So that plays into a natural ability to, when I look at a movie, I stand apart from that movie or the book or the story that I'm watching, or what I'm watching on my phone, or even a story that someone's telling me personally. I've always stood back from it and I've observed, I've watched. I go, okay, that's a neat story, and I've got very good at analyzing stories for their qualities and whatnot, but my personal relationship to them, how much I believe the story, how much, my personal relationship with them has always been at a distance. So it turns out that is also exactly the frame of mind you need to lucid dream. Because what is a dream? When you go into a dream state, you are pulled into a narrative, even if the narrative is coming from yourself. When you go into a dream, on some level, you're being sold on a story, and the story can be insane. It doesn't matter. Whatever story is being pitched for you, as long as it's, you take the context that you're sold without question. And that is a problem. I would say in general, that is a problem. And I think that those of us who know that there is power to be experienced from moving away from our own stories and letting that relationship become a little looser and not so, we don't have to hold on to all of these narratives that we carry with such, white knuckled sort of determination. It's not necessary. And eventually you're going to have to drop it anyway. Even if you want to look at that from the grim part of just like, eventually your story's going to end. I mean, it's going to end at some point. How attached do you really need to get to it? That's always been kind of my attitude. Even as a child, I mean, I guess I was a grim child. I don't know, but it was like, well, so Mom and Dad, you're telling me it's all going to end and the sun's going to explode eventually. Okay. All right. I hear you. Cool. So, but that led right into lucid dreaming, because when I go into a dream state, and the other part of me that is not my story, my ego, my identity, I would just say it's my consciousness, is able to go, yeah, all right, you're telling me I'm on planet X and I'm being chased by a team of, whatever crazy dream is going on. I'm just like, okay, this isn't happening. And what's interesting is as I started getting into these practices as a teenager, and this is also common for a lot of lucid dreamers, a whole bunch of memories opened up for me that I remembered, oh, that's right. I was doing this back in elementary school and I had forgotten about it. It's like that part of all of these experiences I had, they just sort of vanished somehow. And then it's like I opened up a whole other block of memories in my brain. And I remembered, like, that's right. I was doing this all the time. I was able to project around my neighborhood as a kid. And it's like I forgot somehow. And it's one of those things like, how did I forget? I don't know. But it was like somehow some part of all of my memories about it had been wiped out for many, many years. And now I remember all of it completely. Huh. So that is when I talk about my philosophy, when I talk about trying to get people into this practice, because that's my interest. I can talk about my own crazy stories all day long about the things I've experienced over the years. But, my interest is not really in that as much because, what does that do for you? I can entertain you. I mean, I'm happy to entertain people I've got some crazy stories. I mean, I've got some really good stories. We can talk about them. But at the end of the day, it's like, what does that really do for you? I want to try to hand people those core elements. Like there are things that I feel I can hand people that I'm like, I want you to do this yourself. Like, I don't want you to just sit around and just listen to my crazy things that have happened to me, because you'll always be on some level going, is this guy crazy? Is he telling the truth? I mean, because I can always be lying. Who knows what my motivation is, right? But I mean, I would say if I have anyone with any self-respect, I would hope that they, on some level, when they hear my stories about all the crazy astral projection, I would hope that there's someone going, man, this guy may be full of it, because that should be a normal response. So my interest is more in, hey, okay, maybe I'm lying to you. Perhaps I am. I mean, you got to take that as a consideration, sure. But maybe at least consider what it is I'm telling you and try it. Try some of my practices. Start trying to look at things from this perspective, that this is more about your relationship with all narratives that you are presented, all of them. And I do mean all of them, that there is such a thing as a relationship that is going on between your consciousness and whatever narrative is being spun for you at the moment. And what is your relationship with that? So that's what I always redirect everyone's attention to. So anyone who's listening, I would say, anyone who's like just watching this or listening to this podcast, that's what I mean that quite directly. I'm not trying to be metaphorical here. How did you get here? In Inception, Cobb asks that of his new recruit at the cafe, if you remember. He goes, hey, so how did you get here? What's your story that you've got weaving for yourself? Like, how did you get to this place in time? So as you're watching this podcast, I would say, what just happened? You may have some story like, well, I woke up this morning and I went to work and, I came home, I had dinner with the wife or whatever, the kids, and everyone's asleep. And now I'm listening to this podcast, and later I'm going to go to sleep and yada, yada, yada. That's your narrative. I'm not saying it's fake. I'm not saying that there isn't truth to that. But it is the narrative that is holding your context in place. And it's doing it in such a way that we take it for granted because it seems like such a simple thing. Like, yeah, that's just my little story. That is what is going on right now. But your relationship with it is where all the magic is. Can you possibly step aside from that? Can you possibly remove yourself from that and not be so attached to it? Is there a way to do that for you? So that's what migration is all about. Migration is all about learning to analyze these stories that that we hold deeply, and deciding what our relationship is with them, so that I hope to, with some analyzation, bringing some consciousness to it, that we go into that relationship with more awareness, so that we could be aware all the time. What is your running context? What narrative is holding your world in place right now? Because what I have learned is that when you can detach yourself from your operating narrative, you can do amazing things, including literally leaving your body, whatever that means for you. I don't know what that means yet. I don't have those answers.
Well, let's go back to just the idea of consciousness. How do you define consciousness?
Oh. Yes. So within this, the way I feel is that it's funny because I'm basically just going to sound like a Zen Buddhist here. I feel that consciousness in and of itself is the one thing that does not have a narrative inherently. I think that consciousness is not a thing. I think that consciousness is more along the lines of the experience of empty space. I'm going to leave that open for, however people want to interpret that. My general sense is what I'm saying is that consciousness is not a thing. From my experience, it's not a substance. It's not something you can pull apart and go, oh, here's how this thing operates. I don't think it's even a wave of energy. I believe that it is below all of that. I believe that it is below manifestation. It appears to be a thing that perhaps I think that it's, and there's only one. This is not truly divided, is what I'm saying. There is only one consciousness. There is, beneath all of it. And I know people have been saying this for thousands of years. Well, now I'm saying it too. Who knew? But that's what it is. That's how I see it. It is emptiness. It has no substance, and it just simply is. But I believe that it is some sort of, I almost see it as the loading zone on some level. Remember in the Matrix when they go into the loading zone where they got to go get all their weapons and all their supplies. This it's the white loading zone. And if simulation theory is correct, perhaps there's some sort of connection there that it's the loading zone. It's just pure emptiness, but then you can bring in, whatever you want to bring in from there, and that starts with a story. It starts with there's a narrative there, and once you are attached to a narrative, that's all of the narratives and all of matter and energy and thinking all takes place within that space. So I'm basically saying that if you can go back, stop identifying with the stuff, but really it's the story. That's really the thing that you're mostly attached to. You're attached to your story. If you can pull back from that and re-identify yourself with consciousness, then that's when you have access to everything. The idea of travel at that point is silly. In the same sense that when you are traveling in a video game, okay,
right,
you're not really traveling, because I don't think that's really what's happening. And so, my theory in many ways is very connected to, I say, simulation theory.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we know what we're talking about there. We can go into that if any of your listeners may not be unfamiliar with that. Google simulation theory. But I also appreciate it's a very Zen sort of attitude towards it. So that's my answer. That's what I have. That is the only thing that I have felt that I've intuited out of that.
And the idea of simulation theory makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know what it really means in the grander scale. Like, okay, so if we're living in a simulation, where are we? Really,
it doesn't really answer the questions, does it? It's not really a satisfying answer. Like, okay, so then you're saying there's another layer of reality beyond that. We'll say, what does that mean? What does that mean?
And the same with things like holographic theory and stuff like that. That it all kind of comes down to the same thing. It makes sense. It does explain a lot about our reality. However, it tells us nothing about that greater reality.
It doesn't. And all I can say is that from my perspective, you're never going to find out anything. You're never going to get to the truth by following the programming that's been handed to you. Okay, you're never going to really find any of those. If you're looking for the good answers, if you really want to find those big answers, you've got to go back to the loading zone. Essentially, you got to go back to the base operating system, I suppose you could call it, right? And I don't want to have this whole discussion devolve into computer terminology, but that's kind of what using the Matrix example, that's the best way I can describe it. You can't just keep following. You can follow these programs. And then, all you like, but it's only going to lead you to wherever it is that those programs lead. There's not going to be any real inspiration or creativity in it. So what I feel is that in my life, I've been consistently having to drop my avatar of Ian Jaydid, and that's how it feels. It feels very much like more of an avatar at this point. And in my life, I've become much more aware of that. My attitude towards death, I would say right now, is it's pretty much like it's not even a concern, really, because once you know firsthand, and it's not just something I read in a book, like once you know firsthand, like I know I've been outside my body, so whatever it is that I am, whatever I really am, is not something that really needs my body. My body is obviously something that I can go and use, and it's a nice tool, right? And I can just go do what I need to do, but But if you want to go really play around and tinker around with your reality, you got to go back into that loading zone. And I think that, there's a lot of ways to do that. DMT is definitely one of them. I mean, I think Terrence McKenna said, man, you want to, however he described it, I'm going to say it in just a slightly different way. If you want to go back into that loading zone real quick, go take some DMT, and it's going to happen very quickly. You're going to be blasted. If you take it properly, you have the right dose and everything. So no, I'm not suggesting everybody go do that. I don't think that's a good. I'm not even a proponent of drugs really, but I'm just saying, hey, that is one example. Sure. That's one way to do it. And meditation, there's all kinds of different ways that you can get into it, but essentially it all comes down to the same thing. Whatever method it is, what I'm trying to explain is you have to understand what it is that you're doing. You are dropping your relationship with your story. That there is some magical connection between us humans and our thinking and our internal dialogue, because that's where all our stories are held. They're held in our memory. Sure. And that's what we're thinking about all day long. I mean, what are you doing? There's a lot of shaman, like, Carlos Castaneda. I read some of those books at some point. I'm not sure if that guy was telling the full truth about what was really going on with him either, but I liked a lot of the philosophy I found in there. Where he said that we're humans. We humans are constantly talking to ourselves. We spend our day talking about what our world is like. My world is this and this. My world is such and such. I mean, that's what all of your internal thinking that we are doing all day long is doing. And essentially, really what it's doing at the end of the day is turning chaos into something manageable. I mean, that's what we're avoiding. A narrative in many ways, a person's hero's journey, so to speak, is just a way to isolate just the tiniest bits and pieces of a full life lived, so to speak. So it's turning, we tell ourselves stories to kind of avoid chaos, I would say.
That makes sense. You saying all that reminds me there was a TV show on Sci-Fi Channel called Dark Matter that was excellent. And of course,
I've heard it was good. I never watched it.
It got canceled with a cliffhanger, of course. But
that's why you're not the first person who's told me that. I think that's why I stopped watching it.
But the concept was that you had these horrible criminals who get their memories erased, and now they have to create sort of as what you would call a new narrative as to who they are.
Okay.
And they turn into very different people because their experiences are different, their narratives are different. And it just, what I loved about it is it asked that question, like, what are we? are we just our experiences and memories? Or is there some core part of us, you know?
Well, it's how you've combined all of that, isn't it? I mean, It's not, I would say that, you can take identical twins and you can put them through very, very similar life experiences where they basically have the same upbringing. They dealt with the same dynamics in the family, yada, yada, right? And we know that this happens where they could not be more different. So it's all about that combination, right? Like, what do you do with that? How do you, so, and then it brings in the question, like, do people come into this world with a nature that is, because again, I said, hey, there's only one consciousness, but is there also something that is retained possibly from incarnation to incarnation, and I would say that, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I don't know. I don't have those answers. I don't know what's retained from, and what that even means, considering if it's all consciousness all the time and outside of all matter and time, there is only the present moment, right? I mean, that's all that's really exists. Everything else is just held in our memory, the idea of the past, the idea of, there's only now. So what?
So how do you feel that media plays into this narrative idea?
So, and that's what migration, oddly enough, that's what I kind of focused on. I kind of focused on our relationship with media because, I found that talking about how we relate to our media, and that is, and I mean that with, by anything you see on your cell phone, anything that you're searching for on the internet all day long, the movies you watch, whatever, your media, books, anything, your information that you are taking in, your relationship with that reflects, it's like a perfect mirror image of your relationship with your own stories. We relate to stories. We have a nature about us where we're going to relate to all of our media and all of our stories in a very similar manner. So we have a relationship with all of our stories that's very similar. So my analysis of how you approach your media is very much a reflection of how your consciousness is connected to all of that internal thinking that's going on in the mind. And I am making a distinction for all means and purposes. I am saying that when I say thinking, the thinking mind, I am saying that I see that as separate from consciousness. When we, everything that's coming up in a brain scan or an MRI, all of that kind of stuff, all that data, all that information, that is what's held within the physical brain and our nervous system. But there is something watching that. I'm saying there is something that permeates all of that and is observing it all the time. And that is what I'm referring to as consciousness. Right. So the mind also, so the consciousness has a relationship with your thinking mind and your nervous system. But all of that, your identity, your ego, also has a relationship with all the movies you like, all the stories that you love. And so what I do with migration is I kind of go through, let's take a look at what is your relationship to media? How connected are you to it? Let's really take a look at that so that you can start really unhooking all of the hooks that you have on your own narrative, your own story. Because if I can get you to really look at what your relationship is to yourself, the idea is to loosen that relationship up so that it can be more fluid. It's a little bit more free. You can drop it easier. And the more that you can drop that, the more you will start waking up in your life. You will start waking up in your dream states. Although, I talk about lucid dreaming a lot. I always make sure that it's clear that that's not the goal. Lucid dreaming is one side effect of this philosophy that I'm pointing to. That's just one thing that could happen down the road. Not everybody lucid dreams. I don't even lucid dream all that much anymore because I'm doing all of this kind of work in my daily life now. I'm learning how to take control of it now. I'm learning how to take a more of an active role with to use this philosophy to my benefit in my daily life. So it's not about lucid dreaming. You may lucid dream, you may not, but regardless, go take a look and free yourself either way, whether you lucid dream or not. Take a look at what your relationship is to your story, to who you are, the context that is holding your world in place from moment to moment. And it's a moment to moment thing. This is not something that's happening yesterday or in the future. We carry on our stories constantly throughout the day. And when they are threatened, some people get very scared of that. When that story is threatened, some people don't want to be high. Some people run from hallucinogens in the other direction. Some people run from any idea. The reason I like people like you is because you seem to be, you want to dive headfirst into the paranormal. And I feel that instinct is the same instinct that I'm talking about. You want to, you're not afraid to ask those questions. You're not afraid to look at the world from a very strange perspective. And that's awesome.
So where do you think that how does media get its hooks into our narrative?
So media, all media, if it's not giving you just offering you a stimuli of some endogenous drug, and that is a shot of adrenaline or a shot of oxytocin, it's feeding you a story. It is feeding you some story, and essentially what it's doing is that the media that you're really attached to is the one that you like to see yourself in that story. And it doesn't mean that you want that story to actually be carried out in your real life. Let me explain that. It's not like, I love, for example, I love the Jason Bourne movies, right? I think those are awesome. They're a lot of fun.
Right.
I geek out over them. I think it's a great world, and it's really a lot of fun. I think all that's great. There's no part of me that wants to be hunted down by a bunch of hitmen across the globe. Not on any level. There's no part, so that's, right. So when I say, but I like, it's the idea of, to be this powerful character, right? Who's saving the day, who can, with a snap of his fingers, he can snap your neck, kind of a thing. I mean, it's awesome. It's some 12-year-old fantasy of power. And I absolutely get off on all of that stuff. So in many ways, I feel that what really puts its hooks into you is the media that you like to play in personally. You're identifying with it on some level, and usually that identification is with a character. It's usually with the hero on some level, whatever we call the hero of the story. I mean, it's not always the knight in shining armor. It might be in a romantic comedy, it might be the girl who's trying to win the love of her life or something. So it can mean the hero can be a lot of different things to different people. Or sometimes you might identify and this doesn't happen with me as much. Sometimes you only identify with the world. You like the idea of the world they've created. Yeah. And I think that happens with that's happened with a lot of sci-fi for me when I read sci-fi books where I'm like, I don't care for any of these characters. I don't identify personally with any of these characters. I don't feel like this person speaks for me. This is not the decisions I would make. This isn't how I feel, but the world they've created, I'm like, I like the idea of living in this world. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So yeah. That's so I think it's always identification. Usually it's with a direct personality, but sometimes it can be something else. It can be sometimes the place, or perhaps just the ideas. Sometimes there's really fun ideas in something. You're like, I like to think about those ideas. That's, you take it personally. Something about it speaks to who you are, and that's the bottom line. Somehow, all of our media that we really like, it speaks to some truth about us that we either are aware of or we're not aware of. But it's not always. It's not a simple thing. I think one thing we always have to keep in mind is just my relationship with the Jason Bourne movies. It's never a direct I like the idea of Jason Bourne. I certainly don't want to live there. I don't want to be in that situation, And that could be confusing to people. Like horror fans, for example, they used to try to figure out what was the deal with people who like horror, bloody, graphic, gruesome horror. And, there was psychologists for the longest time going, are they just sadistic? What is wrong with them? Are they maybe they just don't have empathy, or, maybe there's something wrong with them. What's wrong with horror fans? And as they've done more research, it turns out that most horror fans actually take the same sort of approach to media that I do. They're actually very disconnected from it, where they feel like, they know that it's not real. Most horror fans are very aware when they're watching a horror film that none of it is real. But what they love is that they are still able to be convinced of the reality on some visceral level, on the parts, where some movie goes, it digs into you and you go, man, I feel like this is real, but you also completely maintain the awareness, like none of this is happening. That's all latex. That's all computer graphics. That's not real blood, yada, whatever it is. But then your skin is crawling because you're like, man, that seemed real somehow. And so it's that we loved to be tricked. But if you take a horror fan and you put them in a real life situation where there's some terrible thing going on where they have to show empathy, they are just as, if not more, empathetic to a real life situation. Like, whoa, I don't actually want to be in this situation. I don't want any of those things to actually happen to me on any level again. But they love to be tricked, basically, at that visceral, adrenaline kind of level.
So, how does being hooked with this media, having this narrative, how does it stop us from having these experiences, do you think?
Because it shuts us down. It puts us in a cube. It puts us into a box. It's a cage, and it's the real cage. The real cage is believing your narrative. The real cage is taking your context that you are currently working within and 100% going, this is absolutely what it is. This is how things are. It's basically the ability to go, the way I see things, what my brain is telling me is the truth. All right. And of course we see this with the most extreme, of mindsets, the most dogmatic mindsets, right? Where, look, what I believe, what I think, my narrative, my story is absolutely set in stone, and I'm absolutely right. There is no wavering on this, and everybody else is wrong, right? I mean, that's the traditional dogmatic mindset, right? And so I'm saying that when you have that belief, when you carry that, it's like carrying a self-imposed cage where freedom on the conscious level is impossible on those extreme states. And so what I'm, of course, always trying to say is the more you loosen up all of your relationships with all of the stories, and I'm not saying it's not about disbelieving them. It's not going, well, I'm just going to totally forget who I am. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying be 100% aware of that your story that you have told of who you are is a highly edited, highly sometimes misedited story of who you are. No story can ever reflect the truth. And that story, depending on your relationship with it, truly becomes a cage on the conscious level. It perhaps is the strangest trick consciousness has ever seen manifested in the cosmos before, is the way some gurus and spiritualists have put it, that the idea of storyline on consciousness is a very strange, it's maybe it could even come down to some sort of physical effect in terms of that we may be even able to calculate with physics down the road somehow. I don't know, or chemistry, I have no idea, but there is a strange relationship that consciousness has with all narratives. And what I'm pointing to is the looser your identification is with your own story, it's like literally there's a cage that opens up the more freedom you have from your own stories. So the more you can pull back from all of the narratives, all of your stories, the more you can just observe and go, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true, and loosen up the reins, so to speak, that your life opens up. And like I said, you start seeing the truth behind everything. You start seeing through the narratives that are being imposed on you by other people. You start becoming real good at finding who are the real, BSers, who are the liars and whatnot. You become much more clear about that. But like I said, that is the doorway to lucid dreaming. That's what lucid dreaming, in order to lucid dream, you have to do that first. You have to get past the dream narrative. And that is always the story that's being spun for you in the moment. That's telling you, this is who you are. This is what's going on, and you have to be able to step back and go, no, that's not right. I think that's not actually what's actually happening, or that this is who I am. So, and there's ways to do that. Well, one of my best tricks is we talk about reality checks in lucid dreaming, like that you start getting into the habit of just questioning. It's something we've never been taught to do. We don't question our reality. We don't ever stop and go, man, how did I get here? What's going on? We don't do that. We take it all for granted. Like, yeah, I know, I know exactly what's going on. We're all so confident. So what I tell people to do in some of my videos is, set a timer every couple hours. All you got to do is just stare at your hand for about 8 to 10 seconds. Just stare at your hand. That's all. Just hold your attention to it. And then just ask yourself, how did I get here? What's actually going on? What is my context right now? And just be aware of what story you've got brewing for yourself right now. How did you get to this place? And hopefully, eventually, the idea is that you will eventually do this in a dream state. You keep doing this during the day. Eventually, you'll go, you'll pull your hand up in front of your face and just hold your attention to it. And when you do that in a dream state, when you hold your attention to anything that's solid in a dream state, very quickly it will shapeshift. This seems to be a universal quality. This is not something that just happens to one or two people. I have not come across anyone who has done this properly yet who has found this not to be the case. When you hold your attention to anything in a dream state, it'll shapeshift. And there's reasons for that. We're not domesticated to these realms. Our consciousness has been in the human world, where we have been dealing with a very specific narrative. Now we are outside of narrative, where when you get outside of your own narratives, things become much looser. It's like reality is kind of always coming together and falling apart. It's much more fluid. So when you stop and you hold your attention to anything for too long, you'll see that it's very liquid. It can just, I've watched my hand 500 times do so many crazy things, like it just will vanish, or your fingers will kind of just spiral off into space, or, something. And then when that happens, you have absolutely no doubt at that point, like, oh, well, now I know that I'm dreaming. I mean, it's kind of hard to, not come to that conclusion after you've seen something like that, I hope.
Well, and I think too, looking at your hands is one of the things I've heard recommended most to kind of get into that lucid state. And I think because it's a command, like normally when you're dreaming, you're kind of a passenger.
You are.
And so when you stop and say, look at your hands, you've now initiated an action and you're no longer a passenger.
Yeah, you're trying to not just be someone who's following a storyline. You're trying to turn yourself from a character in a story to the author. Yeah. That's kind of the way I see it. You're trying to redirect where the power is coming from, because the power is within you. The power is within you. I mean, the power is within you, and that's really the case. But that's how you get to it. That's the doorway. Exactly what you're saying. It's a way to turn our relationship with our present context on its head and going, wait a minute, who's in control? Who's spinning this narrative? Is this really the case? And again, if you can get into that freedom, if you can get into a lucid state of mind, that is where bliss is. I mean, these states are blissful. I mean, this is not just like, these aren't just interesting things to do. This is pure euphoria I'm talking about. I mean, again, this is like, I have done pretty much every drug on the planet at this point, and none of it compares to a complete, a lucid state for even a few minutes. It is just, it's ecstasy. It's absolutely amazing, and because it's our truth. I mean, it's like suddenly you feel like a bird that's just been suddenly let out of a cage, and you're like, oh yeah, that's right. This is what it's like to fly. And then some people do. Some people literally will just, people will fly in their dreams, or they'll, So you can do whatever you want at that point. You are essentially a god. I mean, really, it's the closest that I can find to, if you want to become a god, go learn how to lucid dream, because it's like walking into a fully realized reality but now at this point, now you are the one who is, you know that you're in control and you can just open doors. You can manifest what you want. You can go where you want, literally. So this isn't just in your imagination. That's why I'm saying, like, there's an important aspect that this is connected to astral projection. To me, proves that what I'm telling you about this philosophy is not just an interesting thing to think about. Because I can see how some people are like, oh yeah, I should become the author of my story. That sounds like something, like a life coach would tell you. This isn't just interesting. There are dynamics here that are somehow connected to our greater reality, of how this cosmos has been put together. There is a real relationship between our consciousness and these narratives. And when we understand that, we can literally, not metaphorically, we can literally leave our body. I think I don't know, that seems important to me.
Well, okay, so you can have a lucid dream, though, without releasing those narratives.
Well, yes, if you mean that the dream can continue, and yes, the momentum of the dream can continue, but it depends on, again, if you are still caught up in believing, that's where all the trick is. I've had many dreams where, like I've walked into a room full of people, and I was completely just caught up in some narrative of the dream state, like, oh, I'm going to a party and there's people here, and then I've become lucid in the middle of it. Those people don't vanish, if that's what you're saying. But right. At that point, what I'm saying is it's my relationship with what's going on. Now I know all of this, this is not, I'm not being tugged along by a leash anymore. I'm not being dragged along by some story. Right. Now I'm like, okay, now I get it. Okay, I'm the one who's actually, I'm more of the source of what's going on here, whatever that means. And that gets real weird because sometimes, like I said, those people around you don't vanish. And then you can go have conversations with them. And man, does that get weird.
I guess what I'm saying is I don't see the need to disengage the narrative in order to do that. Like, I feel like knowing it's a dream is one thing. So you're disengaging that narrative. But how does that affect, how does that cross over to, the real world narrative?
Oh, so in terms of this relationship in our real world, disconnecting from our daily narrative, right? So you're saying, what's actually the full relationship between what we see going on in our dream state, what's going on in our life state, or our daily world?
Right, so, or even why the need to disconnect, because you could still do that without disconnecting from that narrative.
Again, you understand that when I say disconnected, I'm talking about, it's all about freeing yourself from the full belief in it, that you're not, that's all I mean. I don't mean that you stop believing that you're you, right?
Yeah, no, I understand.
That's not what I'm suggesting, or I say that I'm not suggesting you have to stop believing that, all of these stories that you've been told about your history or your past, or or how humanity got to be here, yada yada. Those are still there. All of that is still there. You have access to all of that, but it's all about what your connection is to it. That it's more fluid is the best. It's the best way I can describe it. You're not sold into it. And if you can do that also, that's, like I said, that's what I'm doing now. I'm more doing this in my daily life, where I've more loosened up my relationship with any kind of stories I have about myself. And I'm able to be more creative, going, well, okay, what do I want to do now? What do I want to do with my life? And I've been able to now reconfigure my life. I've been able to shape shift my life. Now in the last 6 years, what I've done for myself has been, I'm in almost pure bliss on a daily basis now. Depression is no longer an issue for me. I live in a world where I create almost all day long, and so that's kind of what I've done personally with my own insights. How I've transferred these insights. Maybe that's what you're asking. How I've transferred these insights into my daily life. That now I've been kind of formulating my life the way I'd like to live it. I've been more of the author of my own story, I guess you could say.
Sure,
and it it has it's had real changes for me.
So do you think that okay, so let me see if I can rephrase the question a little bit. Like, okay. You're saying that in order to get to these states, it's necessary to disengage the narrative, but is it? I mean, is it saying that some people need to do, but not everyone needs to do? Because it seems like you could just, I mean, the awareness that you're in a dream is enough.
Okay, so yes, the awareness that you're in a dream, that's awesome. But what I have found again and again and again is that you are constantly being not tricked. That's not the best word. You are always going to be drawn to another storyline, being suckered into another story. So let me give you an example that I had happen, which I kind of started talking a little bit about when I walked into some party. This was a lucid dream that I had in college, and this might illustrate what this looks like when you kind of move in and out of narratives. So I started this dream from a complete state of, I'm this is all totally real. And I walked into this party that was in this apartment complex or something. And there was it was like some party that was going inside like this 2-bedroom apartment or something. And it was packed. There was like 30 people in here, and everyone's, drinking and commiserating and everything. And I become lucid as I'm sitting at this little makeshift bar that they have in the living room. And by that, I mean, again, I fully know that I'm dreaming. I totally know that none of it is actually happening. So yes, at that point, I'm in a lucid dream, and I have full access to all kinds of, I can do anything. And in fact, I started doing crazy things to the people around me just to see how they'd react. Like I said, oh, hey, the guy who was serving drinks, I said, oh, by the way, what do you think of this? And I took my martini glass and I just sort of reshaped it into a glass sphere, right? And just to see, it's like I was just kind of experimenting what'll happen. And this guy freaked out, like he had this really violent reaction, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, you broke some I don't know, some social something or other. I don't know what it was, but the guy's like starts yelling at me, and so I have a reaction, and I'm like, oh, whoa, hold on a second. And I start getting into a conversation with him, like, no, dude, it's cool. Like, this is just a dream. Relax. You're not even real. Calm down. And he's like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm not even real. We get into an argument, right? And as I'm arguing, I lose all of my power because I've now been pulled into this duality, another storyline where I'm trying to win an argument with this guy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then I'm not sure if this is describing or it's answering your question, but as I'm pulled into this guy's argument, I completely lose my lucidity. And so so what I'm saying is there's a direct connection between how much power you have, how much awareness you have, and what your relationship is with the story that's going on for you. See, I went from complete lucidity to like, hey, I'm in a dream state to, no, I need to win this argument. Does that make sense? Like,
yes,
I'm like,
yes.
So I get caught into a context. So I'm no longer, now again, there may be a part of my peripheral that's going, yeah, I kind of remembered that this isn't real. I'm not, this is just a dream, but it's amazing how many layers it's like this bubble gets wrapped around you for each context that you take on. Like, hey, I've upset this person. This person is angry. I have to win this argument. All of those are contexts that start getting wrapped around like a bubble around me is the best way I can describe it. And each one that I take on, that I get invested in, I could no longer. The guy actually challenged me after a couple of minutes. He's like, well, okay, so do that again. Here, I want you to go and change this, dinner plate or something like that. I forget what it was. It was some disc. And I couldn't do it anymore because I was like, it's like I'd lost the truth of the situation. I was so caught up in, no, I want to win. I want to win this. Does that kind of make sense? And so in these states, I can see that I could go back and forth. If I'm getting suckered into some story, well, then I start losing my awareness of what's going on.
So what you're saying is the ability to do it in normal consciousness, to detach from these stories, will help you in a lucid state or an out-of-body state to do the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying the practice really all takes place in your waking state. That's why I say that, hey, mostly in your dream states, for most of our dream states, you are just on a leash. You are being pulled along by some other storyline.
Sure.
But in your daily life, where I'm speaking to everyone, where my information is at, I'm trying to say, hey, take your daily life and try to, if you can get the reins there, if you can learn how to get in control with the narratives that are in place for you now, this will eventually transfer into the rest of your consciousness, into your nightlife, into even your psychedelic states. I mean, I tell you what, if people who go into psychedelic states, they are wrestling with this exact same thing all the time. The people who have the bad trips, so to speak, the people who are like, man, I had a really bad trip, and or who really lose their mind under the influence of a psychedelic, have become completely attached to some other weird context. They've gotten suckered into some strange, abstract narrative, and they believe it.
Right.
This is what I'm saying. It's the same principle that I'm laying out is true for your waking state. It's true for your dream state. It's true for psychedelic states, whatever. What I'm saying is, at this point in my life, by learning how to manipulate my relationship with my current narrative, I can make myself high. I can go into altered states of consciousness now without drugs. I mean, I still smoke pot from time to time, but I don't even really do any psychedelics or anything like that anymore. That was something I experimented with for quite a while, but I've learned, it's like I've learned the mechanics behind it, and I'm starting to be able to now go into altered states of consciousness just in my waking state. I'm starting to do this more regularly. I'm doing it mostly when I'm walking. I'm doing walking meditations now where I'm starting to do this. And I teach that in Migration. I teach one of these in my book, and I'm going to start talking about this stuff in some of my future videos. We're starting to get into these ideas of how you can literally alter your consciousness and you can get high without actually being under the influence of anything whatsoever, because you're going into the principles behind it.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're almost out of time. Where can people get the books?
So I self-published Migration. There's we'll put a link up for that. That's on Amazon right now. I might expand to another publishing place later. Right now, it's on Kindle and paperback. That's all on Amazon. And Tripping the Field, that is produced by Glad Eye Press, and you'll be able to find them on there. I mean, you can find Tripping the Field anywhere because I went through a traditional publisher with that book, and so that is you can find that anywhere. Okay. So that's out there, but videos are on YouTube. All of my links are connected to my primary site, which is Iboga Moon Productions.
Spell that for people.
Well, so you'll just have to use my name, ianjaydid.com, and that'll take you right to Iboga Moon Productions, and that's where I have all of my links to my books and my videos and my articles and all that. All
right. Well, I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this. It's a really this was a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, thanks for letting me ramble. I appreciate it. That's awesome.
I want to take a moment here to give a shout out to all my patrons. All of you help make this show possible. I want to give a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more: Frank Earl, Nagatha Christie, Patricia W., Barbara Fisher, Will Powell, Big Boy Limina, Craig Parmenter, Walker, Joanna Rojas, Maddie, Dale Potter, David Moore, Vincent Treewell, The Great Change, Sam Sharon, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Becky Trainer, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Taylor, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, Matthew Sproul, Charles Davis, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Super Inframan, Riker and Stark, Tim, J. Otto Bullitt, Kevin Shrek, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Ray Benedetto, Linz Jackson K., Ellison Cook, Alfred Tuttle, James Lattimore, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you so much for helping make this show possible. All right, there will be a Patreon extra with Ian Jaydid, and we talk about a bunch of other stuff we didn't get to in this conversation. In that, if you want to become a patron, wheredidtheroadgo.com and click on the Patreon link. And if you just want to help us out and give us a one-time donation, there's also a PayPal link there as well for things like that. And I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.